You don't find this message. It finds you. It arrives in the quiet gap between one thought and the next. In that microscopic pause where your attention is naked, unarmored, and briefly honest. In that interval, before you rush back into your notifications and familiar worries, something in you feels the disturbance like a distant tremor through the quantum field, calling your name without sound. You have felt it for a while now, that strange pull toward the unseen watcher behind your own eyes. You notice yourself noticing. You catch yourself mid-thought. You watch your own reactions like weather passing through a sky you didn't know you were. And somewhere within that silent witnessing, a question has been haunting you. What is it that looks through the one who is looking? What is this second-layer observer? This awareness that remains even when identities, moods, and masks dissolve. Tonight, that question is no longer philosophical. It is the doorway. The field around you is not empty. It is dense with information, shimmering with probabilities, saturated with timelines that have not yet solidified into events. Physicists call it the quantum vacuum, the fluctuating substrate beneath all matter. Mystics call it the luminous womb, the living intelligence behind form. You, in this moment, are suspended in that field like a thread of awareness in an infinite loom. Your life has taught you to identify with the patterns woven on the surface. Your name, your history, your habits, your trauma, your small victories and private failures. You point to this tapestry of experiences and say, "This is me." But the part of you that is listening right now is older than every story you've ever told about yourself. It is the observer, and something even deeper is watching the observer. You think of all the times you have watched yourself from the outside, hearing your own voice in a conversation and realizing you're performing, seeing your reflection and feeling like a stranger, noticing your thoughts spiral and, for a brief second, recognizing they are not you. Each of those moments was a crack in the hologram, a structural glitch in the illusion of being only the character. The quantum hologram, the projected universe of your perceptions, is built from interference patterns, beliefs, memories, conditioned interpretations, all overlapping and reinforcing a stable picture of how things are. Your nervous system calls it reality. Your psychology calls it identity. But behind the projection, the projector is humming, and the true power sits not in what you see, but in who is seeing. Right now, as you hear these words, your attention is folding back in on itself. You are becoming aware of being aware. There is an eerie stillness in that recognition, as if the room around you subtly changes density, as if time slows just enough for you to slip between the frames of your own narrative. This is the signal, the recall code, the first breach in the closed loop of unconscious observation. You did not come here by accident. Something in you is ready to remember the one who observes the observer, and by that remembrance, to begin unlocking the core machinery of the quantum hologram you call my life. You begin to notice how the hologram holds you, not with chains, with assumptions. You wake up each day inside an already rendered reality. The same room, the same gravity of emotion, the same low-level background script that whispers, "This is who you are. This is what's possible for you." You mistake this ongoing predictive model for the world itself, not realizing that what you experience is not the raw universe, but a filtered, compressed, meaning-laden projection sculpted by your nervous system. Your brain is not a camera. It is a quantum prediction engine. Before you ever consciously see, your system is already guessing what is there. It uses past experiences, emotional imprints, and survival priorities to collapse a spray of probabilities into a stable frame you can act inside. This is not metaphor, it is how perception works. You dwell not in reality as it is, but in a personalized simulation tuned to your history and your fear. You call this me. See? You have spent years living inside the first observer loop, the level where you, as the identified self, observe the world and react as if your perceptions were neutral facts. At this level, you experience thoughts like, "They always leave. Things never work out for me. I'm not safe being seen," and your nervous system dutifully edits the hologram to confirm those narratives. You notice the person who pulls away, not the one who stays. You feel the one rejection, not the many invitations. You remember the failures in high definition and blur the victories into the background. This is not because you are broken. It is because your primary observer is traumatized and biased towards survival. So the hologram bends to keep familiar pain intact. Then something strange begins to happen. Without permission, a deeper awareness starts to emerge, and you find yourself watching the watcher. You catch your own mind scanning for threat in a neutral situation. You see your body armor tighten in a safe room. You hear your inner commentary rehearsing disaster in a moment that is actually calm. A second observer is coming online. This secondary awareness does not arrive with fireworks. It often appears as discomfort, as a sense of distance from your own reactions, as if you're slightly out of phase with yourself. Part of you is triggered, and part of you is plainly watching that trigger activate. Part of you is acting out the old script, and part of you is silently asking, who is choosing this? That question marks the beginning of a new physics, because the moment you become aware of the observing self, you introduce an interference pattern into the hologram. The old narrative cannot run as cleanly. The emotions still come, but they don't fully own the frame. A gap opens between stimulus and response, and in that gap, there is a flicker, a faint but undeniable sense that you are not only the one who reacts, but also the one who can decide whether the reaction defines you. Still, the first observer fights for its throne. It tells you this gap is useless. It says, knowing I'm triggered doesn't change the fact that I'm triggered. And yet, something has already changed. When you observe the observer, you are altering the coherence of the quantum field that organizes your reality. Coherence means alignment, the way your beliefs, emotions, and expectations synchronize into a signal strong enough to attract certain outcomes and filter out others. The traumatized observer generates a chaotic field filled with double binds. I want love, but it's dangerous. I want visibility, but it's not safe. I want expansion, but I must not outgrow my origin. The second observer, the watcher of the watcher, begins to see these knots. At first, it sees without intervening. It witnesses you sabotaging yourself and does nothing. It witnesses you choosing the familiar instead of the true and stays silent. It feels like a cruel awareness, a spotlight on your own loops with no exit door. But this is a necessary stage. The light must reveal the code before you can rewrite it. You are in that stage now. You are seeing the pattern of how you see. You are noticing the architecture of your own hologram. In quiet moments, you feel a presence behind your perception. Not personal, not dramatic, just steady, impersonal clarity. It does not argue with your mind. It does not take sides in your internal wars. It simply notices. It is the same awareness that was present when you were a child, looking out through different eyes, hearing different thoughts, watching different identities be built and broken. It has been there the entire time. The question is no longer whether this deeper observer exists. You can feel it. The question is, what happens when you remember that this is closer to who you are than any story passing through its gaze? What happens when the hologram you call my life is no longer anchored in the wounded observer, but in the one who calmly, ruthlessly sees the wound without becoming it? You are closer to that shift than you realize. At some point, you realize the deeper observer is not improving you. It is not interested in making you more liked, more successful, more aligned with the approval metrics of your culture. It is not tracking your performance. It is not grading your healing. It is not even invested in whether you stay in this identity or shed it entirely. It is simply awake. This realization unnerves the first observer. The part of you that has spent a lifetime curating an acceptable self feels exposed before something it cannot manipulate. You try to turn this deeper awareness into another tool, another method for manifesting, another hack for better outcomes, another way to control the hologram without surrendering your core defense. But the one who observes the observer is not a tool. It is the field itself, remembering itself through you. To understand what is happening, imagine a hall of mirrors. At first, you are obsessed with the reflection in the closest mirror, your face, your posture, the costume of your life. You adjust and correct, hoping that if the reflection looks right, your inner world will follow. That is the first observer, self-conscious, reactive, dependent on feedback from the surfaces it watches. Then you notice another mirror behind you, and another behind that. The reflections recede into infinity. You see not just your face, but the endless echo of your image, each copy slightly smaller, slightly delayed. This is the second observer coming online. The awareness that you are not only the reflection, but also the one seeing multiple versions of yourself, the one capable of stepping out of automatic identification. But there is something else in the room, something that is not a mirror, something that does not reflect at all. Call it the dark space between the glass. Call it the silent volume that all reflections hang inside. Call it the quantum vacuum, the 0 point, the silent witness of all witnessing. It does not appear in any of the reflections because it is not an object. It is the context. It is the container. This is the one who observes the observer. You cannot see it as a thing because it is the capacity to see. You cannot locate it as a form because it is the space in which all forms arise. You cannot make it an identity without collapsing it back into the hologram. Yet you can feel it as a kind of unspeakable intimacy with existence itself, as if the universe is looking through your eyes from the inside out. When your attention rests here, even for a moment, something radical happens in the quantum architecture of your reality. The projector and the projection begin to disentangle. The emotional charge wrapped around your narratives loses some of its voltage. The past does not disappear, but it no longer dictates the phase of every future possibility. In quantum terms, identification with the first observer keeps your life locked in a narrow range of collapsed states. Familiar outcomes, repetitive patterns, the same roles and conflicts replayed under slightly different costumes. You keep choosing the same branch of the probability tree because your nervous system is fused with old data. But when awareness remembers itself as the space behind the observer, your relationship with possibility changes. You stop clinging to the same branches. You stop assuming the next frame has to look like the last. Superposition, the state in which multiple futures are simultaneously viable, is no longer just a theory. You can feel it in your body as an unfamiliar looseness in the timeline, a subtle trembling at the edges of what you thought was fixed. You sense that there are versions of you who did not repeat that pattern, versions who walked out instead of staying frozen, versions who answered the call instead of silencing it. The one who observes the observer does not pick a favorite version. It simply holds the entire spread of possibilities within its field. It is not concerned with which specific storyline you choose, only with whether you remember that choosing is possible at all. Psychologically, this looks like a breakdown of your most cherished self-definitions. Statements that once felt like absolute truths begin to sound like options. I am someone who always becomes. I have a tendency to. And then, I used to believe that the center of gravity shifts from identity to awareness, from story to seeing, from fixed character to fluid conscious locus. This shift is terrifying for the part of you that equates control with safety. It is liberating for the part of you that equates truth with freedom. You will feel both at once. You will feel grief as old versions of you begin to dissolve. You will feel anger as you realize how long you have lived as a hostage to unexamined programs. You will feel awe as you glimpse, in quiet flashes, that nothing was ever truly binding you except your unconscious agreement to continue playing a role. In those moments you may ask, almost in a whisper, if I am not the character, and I am not only the watcher of the character, then what am I? The question itself is a doorway, because the answer is not a new concept to believe in, but a direct recognition that cannot be contained in language. The one who observes the observer is not an idea. It is the immediate, wordless awareness reading these words right now. It is here before you think about it. It is here even when you doubt it. It is here when you forget and when you remember. You do not have to create it. You only have to stop exiling it to the background of your life. And as it steps forward, the core of the quantum hologram begins to glow faintly at first, like circuitry you never knew existed, coming online in the center of your being. As that circuitry hums awake within you, reality does not politely wait. It responds, not because the universe is suddenly on your side, but because your signal is changing. The coherence of your field is shifting from a fractured broadcast of fear and compensation into something far more precise, an emission rooted in the awareness that you are not merely inside the hologram, and you are participating in its encoding. You begin to notice this in the smallest ways. A thought arises, the old familiar one. This will go wrong like it always does. Previously, you would believe it, feel it, obey it. Now, something different happens. The thought still appears, but it is immediately held inside a wider space. You see it as a script line, not a revelation. You feel the emotional residue in your body, but alongside it, you sense the quiet one who is simply aware of the sensation. You do not fight the thought. You do not argue with it. You recognize it. Recognition is not passive. Recognition is an act of quantum editing. In the holographic model, every part contains information about the whole. Each belief you hold, each automatic interpretation, each reflexive reaction is like a fragment of interference pattern, encoding a larger story about what life is and who you are allowed to be within it. When you unconsciously identify with a thought, you energize that pattern, feeding the projection. When you consciously observe the thought from the deeper awareness, you alter how that pattern interacts with the field. The wave does not collapse in the same way. The frame does not lock as tightly. From the outside, nothing dramatic seems to have changed. You still go to work, answer messages, move through routines, but internally, a quiet revolution is underway. Micro-choices that were previously automatic are now bathed in a thin layer of lucid awareness. You notice you were about to say yes when you meant no. You feel the impulse to self-sabotage and, for a moment, you just watch it without moving. That pause is not neutral. In that pause, your nervous system is tasting a different timeline. When you do not immediately obey the old script, you generate a new probability branch, one where you respond from awareness rather than compulsion. At first, you might still choose the familiar action. You might still say yes when you mean no. You might still walk back into dynamics that shrink you. But each time you see yourself do it, without turning away, the power of the pattern erodes, because the core of the hologram is not out there. The core is where attention fuses with identification. You are learning to decouple the two. Attention is the raw light of consciousness, the illuminating beam. Identification is the decision, usually unconscious, to say, this thought, this feeling, this story is me. When attention lands on experience without identification, the experience is seen, felt, and allowed to move. When attention and identification fuse, the experience crystallizes into identity, and identity crystallizes into the holographic architecture of your world. So the question becomes, where does identification live when you remember the one who observes the observer? You begin to feel that your I is migrating. It is no longer lodged exclusively in your opinions, your emotional weather, your relational roles. You still play the character, but something in you knows that you are doing so. There is an almost eerie sense of impersonation at times, as if you are watching your mouth speak lines, watching your body gesture, watching the familiar persona animate, while a deeper stillness inside you remains untouched, watching without commentary. This is not dissociation. This is diffusion. Dissociation is an attempt to escape pain by fragmenting awareness. Diffusion is the opposite. It is awareness reclaiming its wholeness by no longer reducing itself to any single fragment. It is not a withdrawal from life, but a repositioning within it. You are still fully here, but you are less hypnotized by the surfaces. As this stabilizes, your relationship to reality shifts in a way the first observer finds deeply offensive. You stop treating external circumstances as absolute verdicts on your worth. You stop agreeing that every setback is confirmation of your core wound. You start seeing events as expressions of patterns, holographic echoes of deeper configurations in your field. Not blame, not punishment, just resonance. Pain stops being an indictment. It becomes information. When something hurts, you no longer only ask, why is this happening to me? You begin to ask, what pattern in my perception does this reveal? Where is my observer still fused with an old story? That question is dangerous to the hologram as you've known it, because if you follow it honestly, you start to find places where you have been loyal to suffering, places where you have unconsciously preferred familiar pain over unfamiliar freedom, places where your observer chose coherence with the past over coherence with truth. Seeing this is brutal. It strips away the comfortable narrative that you are only a victim of external forces. but it also gives you back something the first observer never truly had: authorship, not control over every event. The universe is not your personal vending machine, but authorship over the meaning you encode into the field. Authorship over where you anchor your eye. Authorship over whether you will continue to collapse into the same tight configuration of self or let the deeper, wider awareness radiate through that configuration until it can no longer hold its old shape. This is the beginning of unlocking the core, not by violently smashing the hologram, but by quietly resourcing the light that powers it. By remembering that the one who observes the observer is not a distant deity, not a separate entity watching you from above, but the fundamental consciousness in which all observers, all identities, all universes appear and dissolve. You are not trying to reach it. You are letting it recognize itself here as you. And as that recognition deepens, the images on the screen of your life begin to flicker, not because reality is failing, but because the projector is updating its code. You begin to feel the instability. It shows up as the sense that nothing quite fits anymore, as if your life is one frame out of sync with itself. The roles you used to occupy without question now feel strangely tight, like clothes tailored for a previous version of you. Conversations that once absorbed you now sound scripted. Even your own inner voice, that old familiar commentator, starts to sound like a recorded track, looping over a scene that has already moved on. This is not failure, this is decoherence. In quantum language, decoherence is what happens when a delicate superposition state is disrupted by interaction with its environment, forcing it to appear as a definite outcome. For most of your life, your identity has been in forced coherence with your conditioning locked into a single, repetitive configuration. Now, as the deeper observer steps forward, that artificial coherence starts to fray. The tightly held, "this is just who I am," state begins to loosen into something more fluid, more indeterminate. The first observer calls this chaos. The deeper awareness calls it liberation. You feel it most intensely in moments where your old behavior refuses to fully boot up. You go to react the way you always have to shut down, to please, to attack, to withdraw, but the reaction hesitates mid-formation. There is a glitch, a delay, a silent question mark. You might still enact the old pattern, but you do so while watching yourself in real time with an almost unbearable clarity. It can feel worse before it feels better, because clarity without anesthesia is raw. You are no longer fully merged with your defenses, but you are not yet stable in the wider field of awareness. You are between orbits, no longer tethered to the old gravitational center, not yet settled into the new. This is the liminal corridor where many turn back, not because the old hologram is true, but because it is familiar. You are being asked to endure the unfamiliar. In this corridor, the universe seems to test your signal. Old patterns intensify. People from your past reappear, carrying the same lessons in more concentrated form. Situations that mirror your core wound arise with surgical precision, as if reality itself is asking, will you observe this from the old identity or from the one who observes the observer? This is not punishment, it is calibration. The quantum hologram is responsive to your dominant state of coherence. As your inner configuration shifts, the field echoes that shift back at you through circumstance. Not instantly, not neatly, but relentlessly. Each encounter becomes a measurement, a reading of which observer you are actually living from, not just admiring in theory. You begin to see that your life is not a random collage of events. It is a living feedback display of your inner architecture. Patterns of abandonment reveal where your observer still believes it is fundamentally alone. Patterns of betrayal reveal where your observer does not fully trust itself. Patterns of scarcity reveal where your observer confuses survival with worth. When you look from the surface, these look like stories about other people and external systems. When you look from the deeper field, they are mirrors not to blame you, but to expose the code you are now ready to rewrite. The rewriting does not begin with affirmations. It begins with ruthless honesty. You start telling the truth to yourself about where you still choose the smallness that hurts you, about where you still trade authenticity for control, about where you secretly fear the responsibility of a freer timeline more than you fear the pain of the current one. This honesty is itself an act of quantum alignment. When you stop lying to yourself, your field stops broadcasting contradictory signals. The one who observes the observer cannot be deceived. It already knows, so you align with it by dropping pretense. You sit in a room, perhaps alone, perhaps in the quiet after an ordinary day, and you admit the things you have never said aloud. You confess the secret resentments, the buried envies, the manipulations you have justified in the name of survival. You stop performing even for your own inner audience. For a moment, it feels like dying, because a particular version of you is dying, the one who needed to maintain a certain self-image at all costs, the one who equated worth with being good, right, strong, spiritual, or in control. When that version collapses, there is a terrifying empty space where its constant commentary used to be. Stay there. Do not rush to fill it. In that empty space, the core of the hologram becomes briefly visible. You can feel, almost palpably, the raw energy that used to be bound up in defending an image now freed as pure attention. You sense that this attention, when no longer shackled to self-protection, has immense creative power. The same force that once rehearsed catastrophe can now imagine timelines that were previously unthinkable. The same focus that once scanned for threat can now perceive subtle opportunities, quiet invitations from the field. You are not yet fully living from this core, but you have touched it, and once touched, it begins to exert its own gravity. You will notice yourself being drawn back to that inner stillness in the middle of conflict. You will catch flashes of spaciousness in the midst of old arguments. You will feel, sometimes for only a breath or two, that you are not inside the drama is inside you, arising within a consciousness that is vaster than any storyline it hosts. This is not dissociation from life. It is initiation into authorship. The one who observes the observer is starting to reclaim its throne, not as a tyrant, but as the quiet axis around which your entire reality can reconfigure. And as it does, the quantum loom of your life begins to rethread itself, pulling new colors, new patterns, new probabilities into the fabric you once thought was final. As the loom rethreads, you begin to sense that the core is not somewhere distant, waiting to be reached after enough work, but is already embedded in the simplest movements of your everyday perception. It is here when you open your eyes in the morning and, for a split second, have not yet remembered who you are supposed to be. In that split second, before your mind pulls up the cached identity, the hologram is soft. The world is a blur of shapes and light. Your name is unimportant, and your history has not yet reasserted itself as the lens through which everything must pass. There is only raw experiencing, undivided. That is the core, naked. Then the first observer boots up, and the program reloads. Thoughts arrive, the to-do list, the unresolved conflict, the ongoing worry, the subtle dread. Feelings follow, like colors flooding into a black and white frame. The hologram stabilizes around a familiar storyline. This is my life. This is who I am. What was a pure field of possibility a moment ago condenses into a specific configuration. You call the condensation waking up. In truth, it is a narrowing. The one who observes the observer stands silently in the background of this process, unchanged. It watched before the identity loaded. It watches after. It watched yesterday's story and last year's story and the ones that came before that. The core has never been confused. Only your attention has. To unlock the core of the hologram is not to create a new power inside you. It is to stabilize attention in the place that has never been hypnotized. This is where science and mysticism quietly agree. Quantum theory suggests that at the most fundamental level, what we call things are excitations of fields, patterns of relational information rather than solid objects. Mystical traditions whisper that what you are is not the content of experience, but the aware capacity in which all content arises. When you remember the one who observes the observer, you let these two views collapse into a living recognition. You are not just entangled with the field. You are the field, localized as a point of view. From here, practical alchemy becomes possible. You begin experimenting, gently at first. In a moment of emotional activation, you refrain from trying to fix the feeling or argue with the story. Instead, you bring your attention backward, as if leaning into the silent witness behind your chest, behind your face, behind the thoughts moving across the screen of the mind. You ask, not as an idea but as a felt inquiry, from where is this being observed? You don't answer with words. You let the question redirect your attention. You notice that the anger, or fear, or shame is appearing within a wider presence that is not angry, not afraid, not ashamed. That presence is not cold or indifferent, but it is not fused with the charge. It is like a vast, clear sky in which storms happen without damaging the sky. For a moment, you rest as the sky. In that resting, something subtle unlocks in the hologram. The emotional storm may continue to thunder, but it no longer defines the whole world. You can feel its textures, hear its narratives, sense its urges, and yet, right alongside them, you perceive the quiet, neutral, luminous awareness in which all of this is happening. You are both aware of the storm and aware of being the space it moves through. This is double awareness, and it is one of the master keys. Because when you can hold an experience in double awareness, when you are simultaneously present with the content and rooted in the context, you are no longer a hostage to the code that generated that experience. You are in the core, where changes propagate outward with unusual efficiency. Patterns shift more quickly here. Timelines bend more easily here. Think of the hologram as a nested set of feedback loops. On the outer layer are events and circumstances. Inside that, behavior. Inside that, beliefs and emotional imprints. Inside that, identity. And deeper still, at the very center, is the locus of I am, the felt sense of who is doing the observing. Most of your efforts to change your life have focused on the outer layers. You push on behavior, try to manipulate circumstances, recite affirmations at the level of belief. Some of it works temporarily, but the deeper architecture pulls you back. The core frequency of who I am continues to radiate, and the hologram reconfigures itself to match. When you remember the one who observes the observer, you drop below identity. You contact the bare fact of awareness itself, not I am this or I am that, but simply I am. From this depth, identity begins to look like a costume, useful for certain scenes, unnecessary for others. You realize you can allow old identities to dissolve without losing existence, because existence was never made of them. This dissolving is not merely psychological. It is somatic, it is energetic, it is informational. Your body, which has been the dense archive of every survival adaptation, starts to receive new instructions. Old contractions begin to unclench as they are seen directly from the core. Muscles that have held decades of bracing soften for a few seconds longer than usual. Breathing drops, unforced, into the belly. The nervous system, feeling itself witnessed by something uncompelled, begins to trust that it is safe to update its parameters. DNA is not just a static script. It is a responsive interface. Every time you rest as the one who observes the observer, you bathe your biology in a different signal, not the spiking noise of fear-based prediction, but the stable tone of presence-based awareness. Over time, this signal influences which genes are expressed, how neural pathways are reinforced, which hormonal cascades become dominant. The quantum hologram of your body reorganizes around a new informational center. You are not bypassing the human. You are recoding it from the ground of being. This is why the process feels like both death and rebirth. The structures built for survival under unconscious observation are being dismantled. The structures that can host conscious awareness are being assembled. It is an architectural overhaul of your reality, conducted while you still inhabit the building. It requires courage. It requires patience. It requires an allegiance to truth, stronger than your allegiance to familiarity. But as you keep returning, breath by breath, to the one who observes the observer, something irreversible accumulates. The core stops being a rare, mystical state and starts becoming your baseline. The hologram no longer owns you. It becomes what it was always meant to be, a responsive, luminous, quantum-generated stage on which consciousness can explore itself without forgetting, even in the most convincing scenes, who is truly watching. Something begins to dawn on you that is more unsettling than any spiritual idea you've entertained so far. If the hologram is as responsive as it appears, then your casual states are not casual at all. the mood you consider normal, the baseline tension you carry in your shoulders, the subtle cynicism threaded through your expectations. These are not just inner weather, they are parameters. They are calibration settings that the field reads as instructions about what kind of reality to generate around you. You realize you have been making covenants with reality in the language of felt assumptions, not with rituals, with your default. For years, your default has been crafted by the first observer, the one trained by trauma, rewarded for hypervigilance, addicted to familiar dissatisfaction. This observer does not announce itself dramatically. It lives in the quiet scripts you don't question. People are unpredictable. Nothing really lasts. I'll have to handle this alone. You rarely say these out loud, yet your nervous system broadcasts them continuously. The hologram complies. It is not moral. It is obedient. It does not send you punishment. It sends you coherence. It arranges encounters, delays, openings, and closures that match the signal you maintain most consistently, especially beneath your conscious affirmations. Now that the deeper observer has stepped forward, you cannot unknow this. So you begin to listen differently to yourself. You pay attention not just to your thoughts, but to the felt tone they ride on. You notice the subtle drop in your chest when you imagine a desire. You sense the micro flinch in your gut when you picture receiving what you say you want. You catch the tiny recoil of identity that whispers, "If that happened, I wouldn't know who I am anymore." This is the actual code. On the surface, you visualize expansion. Underneath, you brace against it. On the surface, you speak of higher timelines. Underneath, you negotiate to keep the hologram the same, just slightly more comfortable. The one who observes the observer does not judge this, it reveals it. And revelation is the first act of reprogramming. You start doing something you never did honestly before. You bring your hidden covenants into direct awareness. When you notice yourself shrinking from an imagined future, you say, without flinching, "Part of me does not want this yet. Part of me believes I must stay small to stay safe." When you catch yourself assuming loss, you confess, "I am expecting abandonment because my system still equates intimacy with danger." You are not indulging victimhood. You are bringing the unconscious into the light of the core. In that light, the agreement is no longer absolute. It becomes negotiable. From the perspective of the deeper observer, even your most entrenched pattern is just a configuration of energy and information. It is dense, yes. It has momentum, yes. But it is not sacred. It is not eternal. It is not who you are. It is a survival architecture that made sense in a particular context and is now being asked to either evolve or dissolve. You begin to feel a quiet authority arise, different from egoic control. It does not shout. It does not clench. It does not bargain with the universe. It simply knows that the core has the right to choose new coherence. From this authority, you start engaging the hologram, not as a beggar, but as a co-writer. You no longer pray from the position of a powerless self, asking a reluctant cosmos for exceptions. Instead, you speak from the recognition that consciousness is talking to itself through every form, every field, every force. So, your prayers change shape. They become acknowledgements. Instead of, "Please bring me what I lack," you find yourself saying, "Let my outer life reflect the truth that I am remembering here." Instead of, "Take this pain away," you whisper, "Show me clearly the pattern this pain is revealing and the timeline it is asking me to leave behind." This is not semantics. It is a shift of center. Your words start matching the vantage point of the one who observes the observer. They no longer reinforce the story of distance between you and the field. They affirm the intimacy that has always been. As this aligns, synchronicities increase, not as flashy proof, but as structural feedback. You think of someone, they message. You consider learning something new. A resource appears unprompted. You speak a truth you would have previously hidden, and instead of collapse, a new level of connection emerges. These are not rewards for good behavior. They are the hologram's way of signaling that your internal and external architectures are beginning to resonate. The more you live from the core, the less you experience reality as adversarial. Challenges do not vanish, but their texture changes. Instead of feeling like arbitrary attacks, they feel like initiations, precise invitations to stabilize the deeper observer in places where the first observer still tries to reclaim control. You find yourself in a difficult conversation and notice the old impulse to defend, justify, collapse. Instead of obeying, you breathe and rest as the one who is aware of the impulse. You listen from there. You speak from there. The dialogue unfolds differently, not because you strategized better, but because you participated from a different layer of the hologram. Slowly, unevenly, but unmistakably, a new baseline emerges. Your normal is no longer constant low-grade threat. It becomes a kind of lucid neutrality, a calm wakefulness. From this neutrality, joy can arise without instantly triggering fear of its loss. From this neutrality, grief can move without cementing into identity. From this neutrality, desire can surface without being instantly corrupted by desperation. You are discovering a paradox. The less you grip the hologram, the more responsive it becomes, because the core was never meant to be a clenched fist around reality. It was meant to be an open, luminous center through which reality flows. And as you live more from that open center, you begin to suspect something radical. That the true unlocking of the quantum hologram is not about gaining control over everything you see, but about remembering so fully who is watching that even when the image on the screen is chaotic, your being remains unmistakably clear. There comes a moment when you stop asking whether this is real and start asking what it demands. Because once you accept that your default state broadcasts instructions to the field, neutrality is no longer innocent. It is either a conscious choice or an unconscious surrender. There is no longer a place in you that can pretend, "I didn't know." You know. So the question sharpens. What will you do with this knowing? The first observer wants a technique, a guaranteed method, a step-by-step protocol to force the hologram into compliance. It is still trying to negotiate, still trying to treat the field like a machine that can be hacked from the outside. The one who observes the observer understands something colder and far more intimate. The true ritual is where you live from, not what you perform. Still, your human system needs anchors, ways to embody this vantage point, so it does not remain a concept. So the field begins offering you very specific altars, not in temples or sacred sites, but hidden in the ordinary routines you keep repeating. 3 points in your day become the primary levers of reconfiguration. The moment you wake, the moment you react, the moment you release. Upon waking, you are closest to the core. Before the identity fully crystallizes, there is that thin, luminous threshold where you remember that you are about to remember who you are. Instead of rushing past it, you linger. You allow yourself a few extra breaths in that soft, undifferentiated awareness. You notice the temptation to grab your device, to rehearse problems, to anchor yourself back into the familiar tension. Instead, you ask silently, from the deepest place you can find, from where will this day be observed? You are not promising perfection, you are choosing a center. You are declaring, without spectacle, that your I will rest as often as possible in the one who observes the observer. This is your first covenant of the day. The field registers it. Then comes the moment you react. Not the big dramatic reactions, those are obvious, but the subtle spikes and collapses that happen dozens of times. A tone in someone's voice, a delay in a response, an unexpected expense, a plan that shifts. Each one is a micro-measurement, probing which observer is actually in charge. In these seconds, you practice a brutal kind of honesty. You do not pretend you are calm when you are not. You do not slap spiritual language over raw activation. You feel the surge in your chest, the heat in your face, the constriction in your throat, and you bring the deeper awareness right into the core of that sensation. You don't fix it. You inhabit the one who is aware of it. You might still say the wrong thing. You might still withdraw, still flare, still shut down. But even in the misstep, you are watching from a different altitude. Each time, you ask only this: can I stay in contact with the one who's aware of this reaction, even as it happens? Every time you can, even for a breath, the code shifts. The hologram receives new data. Even here, awareness is present. The field begins to deliver experiences calibrated not just to your old patterns, but to your expanding capacity to remain conscious within them. Then there is the moment you release, not as a performance of surrender, but as the quiet acknowledgement that you do not control the timing of outcomes, only the state from which you participate in them. You feel the ache of desires that have not yet unfolded. You feel the sting of situations that still look unfair, unresolved, incomplete. Instead of tightening around them, you bring them to the core like offerings. You say, in the privacy of your own being, let this too be observed from truth. Not, make it go away, but, let me see it from who I truly am. This is not passive. It is a direct command to the hologram to reorganize around the vantage point of the deeper observer. You are instructing your reality to reveal its patterns, not just its appearances. You are giving consent for illusions you still cherish to be dismantled. The universe takes this seriously. You will feel the response as phases of compression and expansion in your life. Compression, when aspects of the old hologram intensify not to crush you, but to make the pattern so clear you cannot pretend not to see it. Expansion, when pathways you never considered begin to appear through what used to look like solid walls. Both are answers to the same command. Show me from truth. Is way. Underneath all this, your system is undergoing a kind of quantum annealing. Just as certain algorithms gradually lower temperature to allow a system to settle into an optimal configuration, life begins to expose your chaotic states so they can discharge, making room for a more coherent baseline. Old survival spikes, panic flares, shame collapses, they arise in stronger waves, then pass through the stable presence of the deeper observer, losing some of their structure each time. It is exhausting. It is sacred, because the more the noise clears, the more your signal becomes singular. Not singular as in rigid, singular as in unambiguous. The field no longer receives a scrambled broadcast of, I want this, overlaid with, I am not allowed to have this. It hears, more and more clearly, I am willing to live a reality that matches the truth of who is observing. That truth is not small. It is not purely personal. It is not limited to your biography. It is the recognition that the awareness looking out through your eyes is not separate from the intelligence that shapes galaxies and guides electrons. It is local and non-local at once. It is the loom and the thread and the pattern appearing. As this recognition takes root, a new question arises not from fear, but from a fierce clarity. If the same awareness is behind every observer, what does that mean for the way you move through a world full of others? It means the hologram was never just about you. The moment you recognize that the awareness behind your eyes is the same fundamental field peering out of every face you meet, other people cease to be background props in your personal story. They become interference patterns in the shared quantum field, localized expressions of the same consciousness, each carrying data about aspects of yourself you've disowned, exiled, or forgotten. You find it increasingly difficult to maintain the illusion of pure projection, the idea that everyone is just a mirror for your stuff and nothing more. That was a useful bridge, but partial. Now the deeper observer sees a more complex symmetry. Every encounter is both a mirror and a window. A mirror, because the way you perceive the other reveals how your own hologram is structured. A window, because the other is an autonomous locus of the same field, holding realities you have not yet imagined. When you meet someone deeply contracted, you no longer only judge or pity. You feel, in your body, a familiarity, the echo of your own defended states. You recognize the posture, the armor, the ways they grip their storyline for dear life. Instead of only reacting to the outer behavior, you sense the underlying configuration, a nervous system broadcasting, I am not safe, into the field. Once, you would have personalized this. They're attacking me, they're draining me, they're bad for me. Now you see more clinically, more compassionately. This is what happens when the first observer thinks it is all there is. Your boundaries do not disappear. They become cleaner. You no longer confuse compassion with self-erasure. You can step back or step away while still seeing the other as a node of the same awareness, temporarily captured by their hologram. You can say no without secretly needing them to be wrong to justify your choice. You begin to understand that every clear boundary is also a broadcast. In this locus, the deeper observer is in charge. The field listens. Similarly, When you encounter someone whose presence feels unusually coherent, whose nervous system broadcasts safety, whose gaze doesn't try to extract, whose words seem to carry a strange precision, you feel something in your own core resonate. The first observer wants to idolize or compete. The deeper observer simply recognizes, the field has stabilized more deeply here. Envy becomes obsolete. Imitation becomes unnecessary, because you no longer believe they possess something you fundamentally lack. You sense that what you admire in them is a configuration of the same awareness, a pattern of coherence that is not scarce, not owned, not gated. Their existence is proof of concept, evidence that the hologram can sustain that level of clarity. In this way, every interaction becomes a dataset. The angry stranger on the street, the fragile friend, the grounded teacher, the manipulative colleague, the child laughing freely, each is a sampling of how the field can organize itself. Instead of collapsing into judgment or worship, you start asking a different question. What does this show me about what the field can become, and where am I still refusing that configuration in myself? This question is dangerous to the ego. It is liberating to the core. It prevents you from using oneness as an abstraction to bypass the messiness of relationship. It keeps you honest about the places where you still dehumanize others in subtle ways, turning them into functions, obstacles, potential resources, or threats inside your private hologram. The one who observes the observer will not let you stay asleep in that. Because if the same awareness is truly behind every observer, then every act of dehumanization is self-mutilation at the level of the field. You begin to experiment with a different stance in real time. You sit across from someone whose behavior triggers your oldest defenses. You feel the surge, the tightness, the familiar impulse to dismiss, attack, or disappear. Instead of following the script, you let your attention drop back into the core. You silently ask, what if the same consciousness is on both sides of this exchange, trying to wake up through two different holograms? Something shifts. The words you choose alter. The way you listen changes. Even your face, your posture, your micro-expressions carry a different signal. Less threat, less need, more presence. Often, the other cannot consciously name what is different, but their nervous system feels it. Their hologram receives an invitation. You do not have to stay fused with your first observer in this moment. They might not accept it. That is not your jurisdiction. Your jurisdiction is your own configuration, the signal you hold, the vantage point from which you engage. Still, you will notice that some people soften inexplicably in your presence. Their language becomes more honest, less defended. They reveal truths they did not intend to say. This is not because you are special. It is because the deeper observer stabilizes a local pocket of the field where others can briefly rest their armor. You become a coherence node, not as a performance, not as an identity. I am the healer, the awakened one, but as a side effect of aligning your I with the one who observes the observer. The hologram around you responds accordingly. Certain relationships fall away, unable to maintain their previous structure under this new signal. Others deepen, revealing new dimensions of intimacy, creativity, and shared intelligence. You start to see networks instead of isolated lives. From the core's perspective, humanity is a vast entangled web of observer loops, each either amplifying unconscious patterns or transmitting conscious presence. Every time you rest as the deeper awareness, you slightly alter the local entanglement graph. Ripples propagate through the network in ways you will never fully see. A calmer word spoken here leads to a different decision there, which prevents an escalation elsewhere, which frees energy in some unseen corner of the hologram. You are not the center of this web. You are a crucial strand. And as that sinks in, the meaning of unlocking the core of the quantum hologram widens beyond personal liberation. It begins to sound like a planetary function, the field waking up to itself through millions of individual observers who finally recall that they are, and have always been, the same awareness looking back at itself from every angle. As this planetary function comes into view, time itself starts to feel different, not the clock time that marches on in equal seconds, but the felt density of certain moments, the way some hours pass like vapor, while others arrive with the weight of entire lifetimes compressed into a single conversation, a single decision, a single breath. You begin to sense pressure points in the hologram, moments where multiple timelines converge, where the field seems to be holding its breath, waiting to see which observer will be allowed to define what happens next. These are not always grand world events. Often, they are small, almost invisible choices. Whether you tell the truth when it would be easier to distort, whether you stay present when it would be easier to numb, whether you act from the deeper observer when the first observer is screaming for control. At these junctures, you feel a subtle but unmistakable tension, as if reality itself is leaning in. The old you would have called it anxiety, bad vibes, pressure. The deeper observer recognizes it as probability heat, the friction between competing futures, the agitation of a system on the verge of choosing a new configuration. In physics, this shows up as phase transitions, water about to boil, metal just before it magnetizes, a field flipping into a new order. You are living through a phase transition of identity. Individually, collectively, species-wide, the first observers are reaching the limit of what their fear-based coherence can sustain. The hologram generated from their assumptions is fragmenting. Ecological collapse, social polarization, technological acceleration without wisdom. This fragmentation is not proof that the field is broken. It is proof that the current configuration is unstable. The field is looking for a new attractor, and every time you remember the one who observes the observer, you are voting not in some abstract moral sense, but in terms of pure signal. You are offering the field a different pattern of coherence to amplify. You are saying with your nervous system, here, in this locus, awareness is willing to be primary. Here, the hologram is allowed to reconfigure around truth instead of terror. You don't do this perfectly. Perfection was never the point. What matters is frequency and depth. Frequency, how often you return to the core, how quickly you notice when you've left it. Depth, how fully you let it inform your actions, not just your thoughts. Together, these determine the weight of your contribution to the emerging attractor. A single human deeply rooted in the deeper observer has a non-linear impact on the field, not because they are special, but because coherence scales differently than chaos. You feel this in your own life, as certain patterns simply stop, not because you fought them, but because there is no longer enough identification to sustain them. The same provocation that once hijacked you now passes through like a wind that shakes the branches but does not uproot the tree. The same scarcity trigger that once contracted your whole body now flares and dissolves, leaving you strangely clear, even if the outer situation has not yet changed. At first, these moments feel like anomalies. Then they become a new normal. You realize that the deeper observer is no longer something you access. It is where you increasingly live. The first observer still appears, still argues, still performs, but it is more like a character on a stage than the invisible director. You can appreciate its function. It knows how to navigate linear time, pay bills, keep promises, but you no longer let it define reality. This shift has consequences. Some people in your life will not recognize you. They were calibrated to an older version of your hologram, the one who could be easily guilted, manipulated, flattered, or intimidated. When that version stops running, their scripts fail. They may accuse you of changing, hardening, becoming distant. In a sense, they are right. You have become distant from the old agreements that held both of you in a shared trance. You grieve these losses. You bless them. You do not go back. Because you can feel that going back would not only betray you, it would betray the field that is asking for your coherence. You are no longer working only on your own behalf. Every time you choose to stay in the deeper observer under pressure, you strengthen a probability path where humans can remain conscious in situations that would previously guarantee collapse. This is how new collective timelines are laid down. not by abstract hope, but by embodied repetition, enough individuals stabilizing a new configuration under enough types of stress that the pattern becomes available as a default option in the human field. One day, a child you will never meet will face a moment you have never experienced and, for reasons they cannot explain, find themselves capable of staying present where their ancestors could not. Your current courage will be inside that moment. Your current alignment will be part of their unseen support. This is the scale at which the core operates. It sees beyond your current biography, beyond this lifetime, beyond this era. It experiences itself as a continuous field, momentarily localizing as you, them, us, now, but always aware that these are temporary partitions. From its vantage point, everything you do from truth sends a signal both backward and forward through the hologram, altering the informational structure of what is possible. You will never fully track the effects. You are not meant to. Your task is simpler and more severe. To live as if your deepest recognition of who is observing is the most important fact about reality, and to let every decision reverberate from that recognition. As this commitment crystallizes, a subtle but profound realignment occurs. Destiny stops feeling like something that happens to you and begins to feel like something that unfolds through you when you stop insisting on being smaller than the awareness that animates you. There comes a quieter threshold, less dramatic than awakening, more demanding than crisis. It is the point where you are no longer fascinated by insight, no longer intoxicated by glimpses of the core, and you are left with the stark, practical question: will you actually live from this, or will you keep it as a private revelation you visit but do not obey? The first observer loves revelation. It does not love obedience. It will happily let you collect concepts, non-duality, quantum field, holographic reality, observer loops, higher timelines. It will even allow you to have profound experiences of spaciousness, unity, and stillness, as long as those experiences do not permanently dethrone it. As long as, when the moment of choice arrives, it still gets to decide how you behave. The one who observes the observer is not impressed by your experiences. It is testing your alignment, not with punishment, with friction. It brings you situations where your old strategies no longer work, where your best spiritual language cannot disguise the fact that, in this moment, you are either standing in truth or you are not. You start to see your life as a series of calibration points. That conversation where you hear yourself about to lie just a little, just enough to stay liked, and you feel the deeper observer watching. That financial decision where you sense the old scarcity script pulling you toward a fear-based choice, and the core stands behind you, silent, refusing to co-sign the lie that you are helpless. That relationship where your nervous system wants to repeat the old pattern of self-abandonment, and awareness holds you at the edge of a new response. In each of these, the question is the same: who is allowed to author this moment? You notice that when you choose from the first observer, your body tightens. There is a subtle contraction, a dimming at the edges of perception. The hologram feels slightly denser afterward, as if you added another layer of opacity between you and the core. You can recover, yes. You can return, yes. But the field does not lie. It mirrors the choice. When you choose from the deeper observer, something different happens. The choice itself may be uncomfortable, telling the truth, setting the boundary, walking away, revealing a need, risking being misunderstood. But underneath the discomfort, there is a strange clarity, a clean brightness. Your body may shake, your voice may waver, but there is a line of stillness running through you like a beam. You feel more hereafter, not less. This is how you begin to distinguish spiritual fantasy from actual initiation. Fantasy lives in theory and peak experience. Initiation lives in repetition and embodied decision. In initiation, you do not wait to feel ready according to the standards of the first observer, because it will never approve of the death of its own regimes. You act from the deeper observer, even when fear is loud. You walk as if the core is real because it is, and let your nervous system adapt to this new gravitational center. Gradually, your inner architecture reorganizes around a different assumption. Not, I am the character trying to reach the core, but I am the core expressing as this character, in this scene, for this brief and precise moment of the hologram. From here, purpose stops being a mystery. It is not a grand narrative you must decode by scanning the future. It is the simple, uncompromising instruction to be coherent with the deeper observer exactly where you stand. To let the awareness that knows itself as larger than the story speak, move, choose through the finite conditions of your current life. Sometimes that looks luminous. Sometimes it looks ordinary. Sometimes it looks like loss. There will be seasons where living from the core costs you visible things: relationships, roles, comfort, belonging in certain circles. From the view of the first observer, it will look like regression. You were doing so well, it will say. You had stability, acceptance, identity. Why are you risking all of this? From the view of the deeper observer, you will understand. You are not losing your life. You are losing the false agreements that made your life incompatible with truth. And the more you let those agreements die, the more the quantum hologram is free to reveal its hidden corridors. Paths you could not see from within the old identity begin to appear, work that feels aligned with your nervous system instead of against it, connections that meet you at your actual depth instead of your performance, environments where your clarity is not a threat but a contribution. These are not rewards. They are the natural environments that fit the signal you now broadcast. You will move through cycles. Sometimes the signal is strong, the core bright, your choices clean. Sometimes you slip back into the old observer, run the old scripts, believe the old fears. The first observer will try to turn these slips into proof. See, nothing has really changed. The deeper observer simply notices and invites you back. Return becomes your actual practice, not perfection, not constant God mode awareness. Return, again and again, in the middle of work, in traffic, in arguments, in boredom, in sickness, in joy. Each return is a stitch, sewing your everyday consciousness closer and closer to the core until there is less and less distance between them. One day, without fanfare, you realize something. You no longer ask, "How do I unlock the core of the quantum hologram?" The question has inverted. You feel, instead, that the core has been quietly unlocking you, unfastening the locks around your perception, dissolving the knots in your identity, loosening the grip of your old observer until you are increasingly transparent to the field that has been here all along. And as that transparency increases, a final, deeper invitation emerges from the silence behind your thoughts, as clear and indifferent as starlight. Are you willing to let even the idea of your life be redefined by the awareness that is watching it? You sense that this is the real threshold, not the visions, not the language, not the beautiful concepts that decorate your understanding. The threshold is the moment you allow the awareness that has been patiently watching your entire life to redefine what your life even means, not as an idea, but as an operational fact. Up until now, your life has meant a sequence of events on a timeline, things that happened to you, things you did, things you gained or lost. It has meant your story with all its holy chapters and humiliating footnotes. It has meant the hologram you've been carefully curating and desperately surviving inside. But to the one who observes the observer, your life is something else. It is the pattern of how consciousness meets itself through you. It is the way awareness responds when it finds itself constrained by this nervous system, these conditions, these inheritances and wounds. It is the quality of attention you bring to each frame of the hologram as it arises and dissolves. It is not measured in accomplishments, but in coherence, not in duration, but in depth. When you let that definition in, something in you stops negotiating for a more comfortable story and starts orienting to a cleaner axis. Did I remain loyal to truth here, or did I abandon it for an image? You will still forget. You will still fall. You will still get seduced by the first observer's dramas, but you will know, with a clarity that can no longer be exiled, where home actually is. Home is not a future condition where everything finally makes sense. Home is the bare fact of awareness, right now, recognizing itself as prior to the character, prior to the narrative, prior even to the sense of me. From that home, you look at your past, and it rearranges. Events that once appeared as meaningless suffering begin to reveal their hidden symmetry, each one a pressure point that eventually forced your attention back toward the core. Betrayals that shattered you now look like precision, incisions in identities that could not carry the truth you came here to host. Seasons of emptiness show up as the clearing of psychic clutter, making space for a signal you could not have heard while you were still full of noise. You understand, without sentimentality, that nothing was wasted, not because everything was meant to be in some passive sense, but because awareness has used every fragment, every failure, every victory as material for remembrance. You look at your future and it softens. The frantic need to secure specific outcomes gives way to a deeper intention, to let the core remain primary, whatever form that asks your hologram to take. You realize that the most revolutionary thing you can do is not to control what scenes appear, but to refuse to forget who is watching in joy, in terror, in boredom, in ecstasy, in the utterly mundane. So the prophecy of this transmission is simple, and it is ruthless. You will not return to the ignorance you had before you heard these words. You can deny them, you can minimize them, you can shelve them under interesting ideas for a later version of yourself. But somewhere in you, the core has recognized itself. It has felt its own reflection in the metaphors and descriptions, in the talk of observers and holograms and quantum fields. It has heard itself named as the one who observes the observer, and that recognition will continue to work on you in quiet ways, long after this moment ends. You may find yourself pausing in the middle of an argument, suddenly aware of the awareness behind your anger. You may wake in the night and feel, for a breathless instant, that the room, the body, the story are all appearing inside a vast, silent presence that is intimately you and not limited by you. You may catch your reflection and see not just a face, but a temporary mask worn by something ancient and nameless. When that happens, do not rush past it. Do not explain it away. Do not file it under weird. Bow inward, even slightly. Remember, because every time you remember who observes the observer, the core of the quantum hologram unlocks a little more, not by granting you control over reality, but by freeing you from the lie that you are ever separate from the field that dreams it. Your life, from this point forward, is not about becoming worthy of that awareness. It is about letting that awareness live as you, without distortion, in this brief and luminous slice of space-time. The loom is active, the pattern is shifting, the watcher is awake in you. Let it look through your eyes. Let it walk as your body. Let it speak as your voice. And when you forget, as you will, simply return. The core is not going anywhere. It has been here since before your first breath, and it will be here after your last frame fades from the hologram. What changes now is that you know, and knowing, you can no longer pretend to be only the observed.